Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really digging into some critical issues that are hitting communities hard, stories pulled straight from recent headlines, our source material. We're looking at the top 5 stories this week from the Observer Group newspapers of Southern California, published just this week, August 20th, 2025. Think of it as, a snapshot of what's happening right now, covering everything from, well, huge fights over democracy and civil rights to how tech is changing things daily.
Yeah. And our job today is basically to unpack all of this. We want to pull out the really important bits from these complex stories and hopefully give you a bit of a shortcut to feeling, genuinely informed. We'll try to connect the dots, explore what it all means for you, whether you're prepping for something, just catching up, or maybe you're just curious.
Okay, sounds good. Let's get into it. We have a lot to cover, and we're starting with a really significant political clash right here in California, but with definitely national implications. So the scene is Los Angeles. Governor Gavin Newsom and California's Democratic leaders just rolled out a pretty bold plan, and it's framed as a direct response to President Trump's push for, well, partisan gerrymandering, especially in states like Texas, aiming to help House Republicans.
Right. And the core of it is this proposed constitutional amendment for the November 4th ballot. They're calling it the Election Rigging Response Act.
Man.
Its main goal is to protect California's current Citizens Redistricting Commission. That's the independent body, meant to keep politicians out of map drawing. It also declares support for nonpartisan commissions across the country. But here's the really interesting part, the kicker, maybe. It would let California temporarily adopt new congressional districts through 2030 if other states mess with their maps, basically. So voters would decide whether to let the legislature temporarily draw the maps for the next 3 election cycles, kind of bypassing the commission as a countermeasure.
And they announced this at the Japanese American National Museum. That location feels pretty deliberate, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Choosing that venue really leans into California's stated commitment to protecting civil rights, drawing clear historical parallels. Newsom's language was very strong. He actually said, "Donald Trump, you have poked the bear and we will punch back." I know they say, don't mess with Texas. Well, don't mess with the great Golden State. He even sent a letter to Trump saying, this is a dangerous game you are playing with fire when you try to undermine free and fair elections in America.
Okay, so beyond Newsom and Trump, it's really important to understand how this plays out for different groups. What are Black lawmakers saying? Their perspective seems crucial here.
Yeah, their viewpoint really adds depth. Assemblymember Isaac Bryan, who's a Democrat from Ladera Heights connected to his own Texas roots, he said, this isn't about redistricting. This is about whether we let an authoritarian in the White House break our democracy. He was even on MSNBC making the case that California is stepping up to make sure every voter's voice is heard. Then you have Representative Maxine Waters calling Trump dangerous and authoritarian, really stressing the need to protect communities of color. And Representative Sidney Kamlager Dove called the GOP redraws race-based and classist, explicitly saying they're designed to silence Black and Latino voters. She also mentioned Democrats nationally are asking California for its playbook, adding, voters, not janky maps, should decide elections. State Senator Akilah Weber Pearson echoed that, saying California will not sit idly by while Republicans attempt to rig the electoral system.
But of course, a move like this doesn't go unchallenged. What's the pushback from the Republican side?
Well, predictably, California Republicans are calling it a power grab. They're accusing Democrats of ditching the independent commission that voters approved specifically to prevent this kind of political map drawing. Assembly Republican leader James Gallagher was pretty blunt, quoted as saying, "Don't PS on my boots and tell me it's raining." He followed up with, "These are rigged maps drawn in secret to give Democrat politicians more power by dismantling the independent commission Californians created to keep them out of map drawing." Strong words.
So, stepping back, what's really at stake here? This sounds like a high-stakes political battle.
The stakes are incredibly high. First, there's the cost. Just holding the special election for this amendment could run about $235.5 million. And if voters approve it, the new maps for California's 52 districts could potentially cancel out the effect of maps redrawn in places like Texas. That could be a major factor in whether Democrats can win back the U.S. House. It's a big strategic play.
And it sounds like there's going to be a massive fight, financially speaking, over getting this passed or defeated.
Oh, absolutely. Reports suggest former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy is gearing up for a $100 million campaign against the measure. And Charles Munger Jr., who was a big backer of the original independent commission, might chip in another $30 million or so. So, the total spending on these statewide campaigns could easily top $200 million. It's going to be expensive. And Representative Waters really brought it home for Black Californians, saying, "We have fought too hard for voting rights to sit by while Trump tries to erase them. This is about protecting our communities and making sure our voices are heard at the ballot box." So why should you care? Well, this isn't just California politics. It signals a potentially growing trend of states pushing back hard against federal moves. What could that mean for national elections down the road? Could other states try this?
Okay, moving from the fight over electoral maps, let's shift to how we actually understand our history. There's a pretty concerning development reported at the Smithsonian Institution.
Yeah, this involves some serious allegations about the Trump administration essentially taking over aspects of the Smithsonian. It apparently started with a March executive order. That order put Vice President J.D. Vance in charge of purging what they call divisive narratives, specifically targeting discussions around race, slavery, systemic injustice, all under this banner of restoring truth and sanity to American history.
And we're seeing actual examples of this, right? It's not just rhetoric.
That's what's being reported. For instance, references to President Trump's 2 impeachments were removed from the National Museum of American History's exhibit on presidential power limits, despite him being the only president impeached twice. But the focus seems even more intense on the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Nikole Hannah-Jones, the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, called the targeting of the museum's slavery section a sign of a deep sickness. End quote. She warned that erasing or downplaying slavery creates a fantasy of how we got here, and that we literally would not be in the United States without slavery. End quote. And Dr. Amos C. Brown, the civil rights leader, said the museum suddenly returned historical artifacts he'd loaned them. He called it a direct result of Project 2025 and an attempt to induce cultural and historical Alzheimer's.
You mentioned Project 2025 there. For listeners maybe not familiar, that's a pretty big conservative policy blueprint, isn't it? And this level of interference, it sounds, unprecedented for the Smithsonian.
It really does sound unprecedented. Project 2025 is, this massive plan to reshape the federal government under a potential future Republican administration. And the authority given to Vance over the Smithsonian controlling content, funding, even appointments to the Board of Regents for this 178-year-old institution is extraordinary. There was apparently an August 12th White House letter demanding access to internal documents, plans, educational materials from 8 major Smithsonian museums. It insisted on content corrections to swap out ideologically driven narratives for one celebrating American exceptionalism. Critics, like Hannah-Jones, see this as echoing authoritarian tactics. She said, "We cannot be a free democratic society when you have the most powerful people in the world who will take control of a history museum and force them to tell a lie." Though it's important to note, Smithsonian Secretary Lonnie Bunch has publicly stated they remain committed to telling the multifaceted stories of this country's extraordinary heritage. It really makes you think, though, how does shaping history in our biggest national museum affect how you understand today and what you imagine for the future?
Okay, let's pivot now from those national fights over history and elections back to California. We're looking at legislative efforts here to tackle historical injustices head-on through what are being called the Road to Repair bills.
Right. This is about the California Legislative Black Caucus, the CLBC. They've put forward a package of 16 bills for 2025 called the Road to Repair. And these bills are grounded in the recommendations from that huge 1,100-page report by the California Reparations Task Force, which came out back in June 2023. The CLBC says the goal is to transform the promise of equality into a lived reality and tackle the systemic barriers Black Californians still face.
Can you give us a sense of what's actually in these bills? What are some specific examples moving through the legislature?
Sure. There's Senate Bill 518 from Senator Akela Weber, which would set up a bureau for descendants of American slavery. Another one from Senator Weber, SB 437, tasks the California State University System, CSU, with figuring out how to verify who's eligible for reparations, and it sets aside $6 million for that. Though it's worth noting some advocates like Chris Lodgson from the Coalition for a Just and Equitable California aren't happy with the CSU part. He said something like, "We don't need another study. Not one of its 23 campuses has a genealogical department." Then there's AB 57 from Assemblymember Tina McKinnon. That aims at the wealth gap by setting aside 10% of the state's home purchase assistance program specifically for descendants of enslaved people. It targets that persistent 30-point gap in homeownership. And one more, SB 515 by Senator Laura Richardson, pushes for better data collection on ancestry and ethnic origin among public employees in cities and counties. It's framed as a reparative justice measure.
So these are significant proposals. What's their status right now? Are they sailing through?
Not exactly. Many of them are currently stuck in the appropriations committees or what's called the suspense file.
Mm.
That's basically a holding pen for bills that have a significant price tag. $50,000 or more in the Senate, $150,000 in the Assembly. That specific money threshold kind of highlights the challenge. These bills cost money, and they're hitting the legislature right when it's juggling huge budget pressures and other big priorities like that redistricting plan we just talked about. So, it's really interesting to watch a state try to grapple with history through actual laws
Hmm.
and see how those efforts bump up against the realities of budgets and politics.
Okay, shifting gears again, let's address another really critical issue facing communities everywhere: the ongoing crisis of gun violence.
Yeah, and a tragic story really grounds this. Tajudrin Forbes, just 19 years old, was killed in Bogalusa, Louisiana in August of 2023. Bogalusa is a small, predominantly black community, about 10,000 people. It struggles with really high poverty. Nearly 1 in 3 residents live in poverty, which is like 2.5 times the national average. And its violent crime rate is almost double the national average. Louisiana overall has the second highest firearm death rate in the country. It's a tough situation.
And Tajin's death, while a personal tragedy, reflects a larger problem there, right?
Absolutely. Gun violence has really escalated in Bogalusa since the pandemic started. It got so bad that in 2022, a nearby high school football team actually refused to play a game there because of safety worries. Tajrin's own mother said he was planning to leave Bogalusa because, in his words, there's too much trouble here. Nationally, the numbers are stark. Tens of thousands killed by guns each year. It's the leading cause of death for children in the U.S. And young black people are disproportionately affected. More black boys and men aged 15 to 24 died from gun homicides in 2023 than from the next 15 leading causes of death combined. Jonathan Jay, a professor at Boston University, he says it has all the markers of an epidemic. He calls it a major driver of death and disability that's often underrecognized because it hits black and brown communities hardest.
So let's dig into what the sources call the politics of pain. How are policies at different levels influencing this crisis?
Well, looking at the Trump administration, the reporting highlights a consistent championing of gun rights, backed by millions from the NRA. Their approach has involved rolling back key measures from the previous Biden administration. Things like pushing for more guns in schools, weakening federal oversight of gun dealers, trying to override state and local gun laws, allowing sales without background checks in some cases. They also cut funding for violence intervention programs. For instance, they repealed Biden's zero-tolerance policy for gun dealers who break the law, and they removed the Surgeon General's advisory that called gun violence a public health crisis. The Justice Department also reportedly cut hundreds of grants, about $820 million worth, many aimed at gun violence intervention. Now, a White House spokesperson, Kush Desai, stated their view: illegal violence of any sort is a crime issue, and President Trump is committed to making America safe again by empowering law enforcement. But researchers like Volkan Topali warn about the consequences, saying, "We're going to lose a generation of community violence prevention folks. People are going to die." That is the bleak truth of this. And this political environment is intertwined with the gun industry itself, which has a huge economic footprint, about $91 billion. Gun manufacturing basically doubled in a decade, hitting 11.3 million firearms made in 2020. And get this, there are nearly 78,000 licensed gun dealers in the U.S. That's more than all the McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's, and Subway locations combined. We also saw Donald Trump Jr. join the board of an online gun retailer, Grab a Gun. Their own company filings apparently cited gun violence prevention and legislative advocacy organizations as risk to their sales growth. On the advocacy side, Dave Workman from the Second Amendment Foundation argues bad guys are going to do what bad guys are going to do regardless of the law, and that restricting gun rights won't cut crime. And David Umani, a sociology professor, notes that guns are often seen as a legitimate tool for defending yourself within American culture and tradition. And layered on top of all this is how gun restrictions have weakened over time. The Gun Control Act of 1968, passed after MLK was assassinated, set stricter federal rules. But since then, actions at both the federal and state levels have chipped away at those protections. Most states now allow concealed carry without a permit or background check. Research suggests this kind of policy, sometimes called permitless carry, can actually increase homicide rates. Louisiana, for example, recently shifted from vetoing such a law to signing one.
So we see the national policy shifts, the industry influence, but what about at the local level? Are communities using the resources they do have effectively?
Well, that's where it gets really concerning in some places, like Bogalusa. The Biden administration made billions available through the American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA funds, specifically for community violence intervention programs. These programs have actually shown success, sometimes reducing homicides by up to 60%. Bogalusa received $4.25 million in ARPA funds. But according to the reporting, none of that seems to have been spent on violence prevention. Instead, nearly $500,000 went to employee bonuses, which might have even violated state law. Josie Alexander, a strategist with Equal Justice USA, put it pretty starkly. The sad thing is people here can now see that money was coming in, but it just wasn't used the way it needed to be. So
Yeah.
when you connect all these dots, federal policy, industry dynamics, local choices, you really see how profoundly public health and safety are impacted.
Okay, for our last topic, let's turn to technology and how it's reshaping, well, something many of us experience. Airport security.
Yeah, we're seeing a really big expansion of facial recognition technology in U.S. airports. TSA's PreCheck program now has something called touchless ID. It's already in 15 major airports, places like LAX, JFK, Chicago, O'Hare. If you're enrolled, you can just get your picture taken quickly instead of showing your physical ID. Customs and Border Protection, CBP, is also expanding its use with what they call Enhanced Passenger Processing, or EPP. That involves photographing travelers before they even get to the inspection officer.
And the agencies involved really emphasize the convenience and efficiency, right? Speeding things up.
Exactly. TSA says the images they take are deleted within 24 hours and aren't used for law enforcement or surveillance. And CBP claims EPP makes inspections faster, letting officers focus more on potential high-risk travelers. They also stress that participation is optional. Steven Stabenoha from CBP described it as leveraging tech to transform inspections into a seamless, touchless process. But, this immediately brings up the privacy question. Critics have been raising concerns about airport facial recognition for a while, and those concerns aren't just theoretical. Back in 2019, the Department of Homeland Security actually confirmed that traveler photos were stolen in a data breach involving one of their subcontractors.
So, with that tension between convenience and privacy, is there any legislative action happening to address it?
There is. A bipartisan bill called the Traveler Privacy Protection Act of 2025 has been proposed. It aims to put some guardrails in place. It would require travelers to give explicit consent before their biometric data is collected. It would also ban passive surveillance, like scanning crowds, set clear deadlines for deleting stored images, and mandate annual reviews by the Government Accountability Office. Those reviews would look at the technology's accuracy and check for potential bias based on race, age, or gender. So it really puts the question to you, the traveler. As this tech rolls out, how do you personally weigh that convenience against your privacy rights? What stands out to you in this trade-off?
Wow. Okay. That was quite a deep dive we took today. From these intense political fights over election maps and how history is told, to really deep societal challenges like reparations and the public health crisis of gun violence, and even how technology is changing something as routine as going through the airport.
Yeah, and you really see how interconnected these things are, don't you? Understanding one piece often sheds light on another. They aren't just separate stories. They're all part of this larger picture that's shaping, our reality right now and where things might be headed.
Well, hopefully, digging into these stories gave you maybe some surprising details, perhaps a few aha moments along the way, and most importantly, maybe a more nuanced view of these really complex issues. That's the goal, helping you feel truly well informed.
And as we see information shaping so much, how we remember the past, how our elections work, how safe we feel, kind of leaves you with a question, doesn't it? What responsibility do you feel you have in engaging with these complex realities and maybe helping to shape what comes next?
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We look forward to exploring more with you again soon.